we're good to go. So this particular webinar is on how to work with others. We did one previously on you being at your best when working virtually, but the nuance here is when you're working with others and you're working virtually, what are the sorts of things that you need to know about yourself, and what are the things you need to know about them, so that you can have constructive exchanges and still be effective when you are working virtually, whether that be at home or wherever you might be working from, but they're not in front of you walking down the hallway the way they might have been only a few weeks ago. So let's let me share some slides here with you. See the slides okay?
Yep.
Okay. So first of all, just good housekeeping. Normally when you start a workshop, you tell people where the restrooms were and when we're going to have coffee breaks. Here, our housekeeping with ID is about understanding who's in the group. And so this is the culture. If we put the collective IDs together of everyone who registered for the webinar today, you can see this is the culture. And although in the general population, you have an even distribution, when you consider that the bulk of the people registering are coming from business and, for that matter, business leadership positions, it is consistent that we'd see a strong verify, avoid complete domination, and it sort of varies with the other two drives depending on, the mix of the different companies and levels. But this is pretty consistent with what we'd expect to see. I just thought for those of you who are interested in understanding these dynamics, I'd share this with you first. The second piece around housekeeping is to have our own house in order. No matter who we're going to be interacting with, we should all first come from a place of being as in stride as we possibly can ourselves. I'm sure the bulk of you have seen this slide before, which really to me is the essence of ID. This is what sets ID apart from, well, virtually all other psychometric testing and assessment processes, is that it's defining what best looks like for you. It's not just your personality or where you are on any given day. It's really saying that green arrow there is you in stride. This is you at your best, and this is how you need to operate if you're going to really bring the best version of yourself. And so I think before you even engage into the day, the self-awareness that comes from your ID lets you pay attention to getting in stride first, and that's always the best place to come from. I have a question raised by one of the people on this program, actually, which if we have time, I will answer live at the end of this call, but I have already answered it on a YouTube video, which I'll refer you to afterwards. But it's about how do you work with people when they're different to you and you're virtual and you can't see them face to face. We're going to be specific about that today based on ID, but when you don't know their ID, my first thing would be, start from a place of being in stride. And I shared more on the YouTube clip. So this is just a great place to start. This was the question. So I've got the question here, and if people, I just put it here to provoke potentially other questions. But if you want the answer to this, as I say, I've put a clip already together on our YouTube channel. That's the Instinctive Drives channel on YouTube. Okay, so we've really got two dimensions to look at here for the drives. The first is if you are driven by an instinct, in this case, the verify drive. And secondly, it's like if you're working with someone who has that drive, what do you do? And I've got some bullet points up here to share with you, but this is the first time we're running this particular webinar. And some of you who have this drive, and I want to say this drive, I mean any of the 8 directions as we get through them, you might have things that that jump out to you where you go, wow, that's not on that page, and that would be good to have on there. So please call that out. I will stop at the end to take questions or comments so that we can polish these slides up as we go through and make sure we've got a great product for a broader audience after this particular webinar. But these were the first things. First up, when you think, and this is the nuance of working virtually, the first thing is that we say with people, vacuums drive suspicion. It's something about human nature that when you feel disconnected or in the dark, you tend to go to a dark place of suspicion or concern. And when you are a verifier and you're naturally driven to be skeptical anyway, what happens is you can be very easily coming from that place, probably more than you would when you see people in the corridor. So I think it's really good to be aware of that. And if you're working with other people that are strong with that verified drive, of course, turn up the volume of your communication to, how often you communicate, the nature of the communication, so that you don't have these vacuums when people are in isolation. Assuming positive intent, I mean, this is just a game-changing strategy that we use as part of our trust protocols, but that's really important when you are someone yourself that can be vulnerable to that skepticism. So verifiers tend to default to emailing a lot, and it's very easy to get into a ping pong match with emails, and it gets ugly. It can get ugly. And I would just say to you, don't fall into that trap. You know, it's easy when someone's working with you live to just grab them for a couple of minutes and have a live discussion, and the humanness of that diffuses what could otherwise be an ugly situation. So if you've had more than 1 or 2 exchanges on a topic via email, pick up the phone or start a more human interaction than hiding behind email. And the last one is around the questions that you ask. You know, it's so easy to share expertise or share your opinion. It's a much more astute place to come from of sort of thinking, how do I say that by asking questions? And when you're asking questions rather than telling, how do you do it in a way that, or making sure you do it in a way that is coming from a place of genuine curiosity, not interrogation? And that to me starts by checking in on where is your heart. If your heart is critical, then no matter how nice you try and sound, you will probably come across critical. If your heart is in a really genuinely authentic, loving, curious place, you will have a better chance of coming across with that curiosity. So let me just check in there, first of all, for those of you who do have that drive, and think about not just how to work with you, but how to work with you when working virtually. The strong verifiers in the room, or in this room, this webinar room. Is there anything else that you would say stands out to you that you want to capture?
Yes, I think, you know, with my 7 verify, I just need people to provide something to verify. In other words, detail and a bit of, well, a bit of detail just to confirm what they're thinking.
You're on the next one. Look at this. Look at this. You're perfect, Doug. If we go to working with the verifier,
They're good teachers
to verify and prepare. Right? So this is the sort of other side of the same coin, which is where you're going, Doug. So if you're working with someone like Doug, then this is what they need. So don't just jump on and start a discussion if you haven't had a chance to give them, if they haven't had a chance to actually think about what it is you want to talk about.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The one that I find
when they're working isolated from you, you won't always remember or be aware of what they're working on and what their priorities are. But if you've got something you want to engage them on, you've got a much better chance of getting their attention, and for that matter, their action, if whatever you want is going to help them with one of their priorities.
Yeah, Paul, the one I struggle with being a 6 verify is in the office, the networks and the access to data is really easy. Working from home, it's a lot harder. So trying to use other means of getting information as opposed to what you normally approach is just takes a bit of tact to find a different way.
How do you do that, Yubaldo?
I think, you've touched on it already, is picking up the phone a lot more, asking more questions as opposed to just trying to get a quick shot of data out of a system or a reporting repository or whatever.
Right.
Because rather than taking a few seconds to access, it might take anywhere up to 15-20 minutes from home, depending on the network. So it's just finding different ways of just getting that hit of information you need to make a decision.
It's a good point, because what I would just counsel people on is I'm already, after only a couple of weeks, I and a couple of other people already noticing there's a lot of comment about the increase in email traffic that's occurring with people trying to, I guess, close that gap that exists when you're working virtually, and it's sort of killing people. In fact, you asked for it the other day, Yubaldo. I just put a YouTube clip up last night. I don't know whether you saw it. Your question about how to handle email volume. So if you check on our Instinctive Drives YouTube channel, there's a clip on there now around how to handle that load. So I promised you that, so I got that done last night for you.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And then if ever you get a verifier who's not contributing in a meeting, like you just notice someone's being really quiet, it's not that they're necessarily disengaged. They're thinking about something. They might even be thinking about something that's not on topic, But if you at least ask them what are they thinking about, then that will engage them, because that's like in line with what's going on for them. You know, something's going on in their mind. They're not sitting there just with their head in space. You know, so I'm just conscious of these are the sort of little tips that you can use to engage the people if you're working with them and you can't see them, so you don't really know where they're at. Then this is how you connect with them. Any other questions or comments? Okay, let's zoom through. If you're an avoid verify, so this is for you. If you are the person who is the avoid verify on the left-hand side of the page here, you need to be conscious of how brief you might be and how the lack of context can cause the confusion that then kicks off a ping pong of email exchanges or even verbals trying to get that understanding. So just having an upfront conversation to fill in all those gaps, not by you necessarily anticipating all the questions, but just giving the space for others to then ask their questions. You provide the answers so that people feel more grounded and more complete in their awareness to get on and do whatever it is that you might require. And then the second point here is, and this came up in when we were developing these slides, was just, it's not the nature of an avoid verifier to automatically prioritize everything. Everything's sort of seen on a horizontal path rather than a vertical path. So all things feel of a similar priority nature. And yet you know that they're not all the same, but you don't necessarily know how to differentiate them. So just having that conversation to get the input from others, your various stakeholders. Now, okay, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to stop doing? Or what's more important here? And just checking in on that. It might be something you do every day or even several times a day if the pressure's really on, so that you stay aligned on the priorities rather than feeling this pressure that everything's got to get done when it may not be that way for the people that are actually on the receiving end. Now, I know there's only 2 bullets here, but we weren't trying to fill the page. We were trying to think of the key things that really stand out when you're working virtually with somebody. And I'm curious if there's anything else that stands out to our avoid verifiers that for you to be at your best on this page here. Is there anything that, other than these 2 points occurs to you?
So this is Patricia. I find for me, in working like in a virtual environment, that there are, when the pressure's on, which it is right now with everything going on, that there are a lot more questions coming from the people who are driven to use Verify, and it can really shut me down. So it's kind of like keep the questions, more forward focused, or put some context, because for me, if I get a barrage of questions, it feels like I'm being interrogated, and I shut down, which isn't healthy for either one.
True. Maybe what I'll do, Patricia, is I'll show the other side and then get the comments, because some of these things can be on this side of the ledger here as well. Because I know that somewhere, do I have that on there?
Oh, working with, okay.
Yeah, on the working with, as opposed to what do you need, for you to be set up for, what do you need to be conscious of when you're the one working virtually with people? Or if there's, maybe it's the verifiers who say, they have a comment about the avoid verifiers. Maybe that's the way I should have asked it. So anything else that they need to know. So have a look here on the right-hand side. So the first one is about playing team. So the avoid verifiers, again, think horizontal rather than vertical. So they want to be part of the team. They want to feel included, not excluded. So the verifiers think silo. Don't even think, it's just more the way they operate, tend to operate silo. The avoid verifiers think horizontal and team. And so when you're not then together live, it's very easy to feel not just disconnected, but excluded. And even just like, why aren't I on that email chat, or that email trail, or if it's in a chat, where am I? And you're far better off just automatically including them and letting them be the ones to say, hey, I don't need to be included in that, and letting them exclude themselves, rather than you assuming they're not needed and excluding them. Even if they're not needed, there's just a feeling that comes across that when they feel more included, more part of the team, it keeps them more engaged and up. Your curiosity, it may just be natural curiosity for you. As Patricia was just saying, even a simple question can land like an interrogation or an avoid verifier. So if you are coming from that place of real curiosity, firstly, check yourself on it as a verifier, but even reassure them that, hey, I'm not questioning you. I'm truly just trying to understand this, but I've got you. I'm with you. I just want to understand it. If you don't get a decision, see, the thing with an avoid verifier is they have that sense of knowing, you know, and if it's straightforward, they'll have a reaction. And if they don't have a reaction, probably it's because if it is straightforward, well, it doesn't matter to them. They're happy to go either way with it. There's no real specific issue for them. But if it's complex or overwhelming or, you know, confusing, that means it's not straightforward to them and they may not be able to give a response. So instead of assuming they just don't get it, you know, one of the ways you can interpret that is like, okay, so this isn't as clear as I need this to be. And keep working it through, because they're probably not the only ones that don't get it, or even the verifiers that think they get it might actually have misinterpreted it. So I think it's a really neat way of using an avoid verifier's response as a barometer for the clarity of your communication. Oh, sorry. And then I can't see these photos, the pictures keep getting in the way. Sorry.
So Paul,
Oh, yeah.
so on the verify, the one thing I'm finding for myself is I'm not trusting my gut as much as I usually do, and I've got to start doing that.
Are you saying that because you're working more virtually?
Yeah, and I'm not having, I think the thing is I'm not having as much, as many opportunities to bounce things off of people. And so I'm questioning whether my gut is really right. And I need to just start moving forward and saying it is, and you don't need to bounce it off anyone and get all that collaboration going that you normally do. You just need to trust it and move forward.
It's so true, Patrice. That's a great call out. The number of avoid verifiers that will say, I've got that sense of knowing, but I lose confidence in it, you know, when, you know, you're just not on your game. So that's that's good self-awareness on your part to recognize that. Well done.
I'm a avoid verifier as well, and I'm working from home all the time. So not just right now.
Yeah.
And I often find it easier when I call people, like having the interaction and getting things done rather than doing it in emails makes me feel much more comfortable in being able to interpretate questions. I sometimes go ahead like with no context for anyone else because I know what it is. So you don't have to, you know. And I think that's much easier in not in person, but like talking to each other rather than emailing or IMing.
Yes.
I find myself IMing though a lot compared to sending emails.
That's much more real for you, isn't it, Dorothy?
Yeah, definitely is.
Yeah.
And the thing with being what I think is important, I can definitely relate to that too. When I have something, it needs to be fixed now, not later.
Right. Well, and that's true for a lot of avoid verifiers because it's got the same importance. You know, it can, when you've got a lot of demands on you, I think the point we're making is that you can then feel overwhelmed with all these things coming at you, whereas they're not the same importance necessarily to the people who are making those demands. You know, they don't expect you always to drop everything and do it straight away, but it can feel like that, even just with the passion behind the question.
Yeah.
Thanks for the input. That's great. Let's move on to the Authenticate drive. So if you are an authenticator, then here are the things to keep in mind when you're working virtually. So the first is you're very task oriented, and yet when you think about being virtual, the big compromise is the lack of humanness. People don't have that connection, that contact. So just starting calls and meetings by checking in and focusing on the relationship first and then getting into the task. It doesn't mean you've got to spend 20 minutes on it. It could be as simple as just making a comment about what they're wearing or how they show up, their energy, or, you know, just something a little human. Could be their office or something you remember from, you know, they were going to be doing yesterday and you check in, how did that go? But just something that relates to the humanness, as opposed to starting the meeting with, you know, hey, Fred, let's get into the call and straight into the work. And you're dealing with the task and it might feel very efficient, but over the course of time, it compromises the relationship. And along those lines, if you're aware of little things, whether it's anniversaries, birthdays, successes they've had, things going on in their family, just even asking how they're coping with the transition that's going on right now around the world, you know, or even getting their perspective on it. They're the little relationship/human things that really make a difference, not just to the avoid authenticators, but to the humanness of working virtually, which is what people really start to notice. And if you go back to 2008, when we had the global financial crisis, it took about 2 to 3 months before people really started to really notice the difference of not meeting up regularly. And for some reason, I'd say after 3 weeks, maybe it's because we're in isolation now, in many cases, you know, it's already there for so many people, the noticeable difference with the lack of human contact and collaboration. So one of the big things, the third bullet point is picking up that one of the things that gets compromised a lot is the implicit communication rather than just what's said and what's explicit. So paraphrasing back what you hear as an authenticator, say, okay, so what I'm hearing you say, or what I'm hearing we've agreed on, or what you've just promised is, or what you want me to do is, be explicit about that, because once you play it back, others can then see where the misunderstandings may still exist, and they can clean that up right there. If you don't do that, then working virtually is really vulnerable to a lot of misunderstandings and then a lot of wasted effort that then occurs. And if you're silent, you know, it may simply be because you've got nothing else to add. But people don't always know how to interpret your silence. They don't know whether they've made you frustrated. They don't know whether you're distracted, disengaged. So if you found you've been silent for a little while, just cover that off by explaining to people what's been going on for you. Like, well, guys, I'm totally good. I'm still engaged, but I agree with everything that's been said. I'm on board. Just so that's clear. You can't tell that when you can't see people. So they're the things about what the authenticators need to be clear of. Let me show the other side of the coin, and then I'll take any questions and comments and, you know, additions that you might have as well. So if you're working with an authenticator, these are the things you want to do. Video on. It's still not a common protocol, and honestly, it's good for everyone to have it on. It helps the human factor, but for an authenticator, you even heard others here comment on it before, that the more real you can make the interaction, the better their engagement. But make sure it's also good quality, because authenticators need quality tools, and if it's not quality, it can be very distracting, more so to them. Be explicit on what you want them to do. So this is about them personally. If you make a general call like, hey guys, what I need everyone to do is, that doesn't land for an authenticator. I need to say, hey Greg, hey Alona, you know, call out the people specifically around what you want them to do, and for that matter, to not do, because an authenticator responds to a cry for help. And if I'm venting about something which makes it sound like I need help, even though I don't ask for help, an authenticator assumes, well, you want help because that's why you're saying it. You wouldn't be wasting your words if you didn't want me to help. So if I'm just venting and I don't need action, call it out and say, hey, I don't need you to do anything here. I just need you to listen and let me get this off my chest. And they're like, okay, cool. And then if it's possible for them to be physically active while they're talking to you, whether that's standing up, walking around, being outside, all of that physicality brings a better level of engagement for an authenticator. They may not think to do it, but if you encourage them, you know, or don't be put off by the fact that someone's out walking. Don't think, oh, well, I've obviously got you at a bad time, so let's set up a meeting when you can focus. The authenticator out walking is focused, so, or engaged at least, to contribute to your conversation. So any other thoughts, comments, questions you guys have around the Authenticate drive?
Well, Paul, I think I've got to say I'm on side with everything you've said. I think it was fantastic.
Thank you, Richard.
and I'm just about to go outside.
I'll add something. What for me, the reason for the meeting's got to be really crystal clear in terms of what are we going to achieve at the outcome. We need to know. I need to know. I'm spending this time doing this and not out in the garden or something. What are we going to do that we couldn't have done on our own by ourselves? And what are we meeting here for? That's actually crucial for me. That I'm not wasting my time. And if we're going to just chat, that's fine, but that's got to be the purpose, that sort of thing. And I don't necessarily need to be moving as long as I'm engaged in it or doing something. So writing something down or asking questions, that can take the place of going for a walk as long as I'm really needed or really useful.
That's excellent, Greg. Thank you. Great distinctions. You've raised that before about, I'd missed that reason for the meeting. That's a really, I mean, I can tell by the way you share it, that's a really critical component to you. Thank you.
My hair's not on fire anymore. It's okay.
All right. Anybody else? Let's talk about the avoid authenticate drive. So when we thought about this one, this was interesting. The main thing that came up here was the incongruency between what people can see and get from you and what they can't. So for example, the first bullet point is really saying you could even make a joke about something, but if you say it with a serious face, people can't see you necessarily to get that, oh, you were just, you know, having a joke about that. So you might need to call out that, hey, I'm joking. Or if you're away from the camera or away from your desk, just explain to people what's going on so they don't misinterpret the gap between what's actually going on and what they're interpreting. But that sort of plays into the second bullet point as well, that there will just be times when no matter how well-intentioned you are, your behavior and your actions don't connect to your motives. And it's really, like, it's even harder. That's true when you're working live with somebody, but it's really exacerbated. And I've noticed it significantly myself when I'm working virtually with people, is there's just these gaps that occur between what you're intending to happen and what actually played out. So, you know, being very, very cognizant of that and just being sort of over the top explicit to explain what people can't necessarily see. I find that I particularly need to be very conscious of bringing that out into the open because no one else is aware of it if you're working virtually. I couldn't see other significant things. I don't know whether other people would notice them as avoid authenticates or in working with avoid authenticates, but it was that gap and this congruency factor that really stands out when you're working virtually. And if you are working with the avoid authenticates, then this piece around connecting and relating, building the relationship that I mentioned earlier, that is particularly important to the avoid authenticate. If you notice a gap between what they stand for, not just what they're saying today, but if you know them and you know what their values are and you know what they really care about, and there's a gap that's occurring between what you know they stand for as their ideals and their values and what's playing out today in the call or in the, you know, interaction, call them out on that because they do really care about that gap. But just because they care about it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. But it's a huge motivator. Greg, you have a question?
Yeah, from our point of view in working with avoid authenticates, we'd like you to check in more often that we got what you thought we got. Like we won't know that you just said something that was a pretty much done deed, and we skipped it. And then if you without this nonverbals, my face would tell you normally, right?
Right.
I think you guys almost need to put a build-in some system that says I better check it, just regular check-ins. And worst case is we all go, yeah.
That's a great call out. I mean, the pain of an avoid authenticate is you think everything's so obvious. So, I mean, that's just a great call out. Thank you.
Yes, I agree. The what I call the implied message, you know, for us authenticate surface dwellers, we can't see what's being implied.
Right. Well, and the challenge for the avoid authenticate is they thought it was explicit. They don't realize that's the point about
Exactly.
obviousness. They don't realize that it was being implied, you know. So I think this is great finessing that you're suggesting here.
Paul, one thing that I've noticed is because we sometimes talk in a little bit like not obvious, that benefit of the doubt is really important because I'm married to a 7 and my daughter-in-law's an 8, my son's a 7, and I get misinterpreted all the time because it's so literal and I don't have that natural way of just being so literal, and they take me literally. And so benefit of the doubt and positive intent would go a long way for an avoid authenticate.
Thanks, Pam.
That's good.
Thank you.
So,
Anybody else?
Paul, just a couple of things. So that with the use authenticate, you said putting the camera on is really important, and it's for a different reason. But with avoid authenticates, I find it really important around the connection piece to have the actual camera on. It actually makes for a much better meeting if I can see the person I'm talking to, because I feel like I can see their face, and I know we're miles apart, but I feel connected.
Yeah.
It's just
That's
something
good.
instant that happens for an Avoid Authenticate.
That's a really good point, Vic, which is put that on for everyone. Yep.
And then the only other comment I would make, which made me laugh, which is the conversation I had with you the other day when you said, and it's what Greg's just called out about checking us, Avoid Authenticate, checking in all the time. But interesting enough, something you pulled me up on, and I said to you that I actually don't like that I do. I overdo that, and I've just realized where it comes from when I say to people, do you know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
So I need to change the way I say that, because to Greg's point, I do it to make sure that a use Authenticate gets me every time, but it can actually annoy the crap out of people when you're saying constantly, you know, do you know what I mean? So
yeah,
that's really good, Vic. Really good. Thank you.
Vic,
I
try
think
this.
on
Just
that-
say, how
on
does
that
that
one.
sound? Instead of what
Okay.
do you know what instead of you know what I mean, assume I got something and go, what does that make sense to you? How does that sound to you? How did that land for you? That way you're checking in with me, not just presuming I'm a receiver, you know.
That's my expression. Does that make sense?
I do that all the time too.
cool. Thank you, guys.
I just wanted to add something on to Vicky's comment about the camera too, because I find it really important, because I feel like I read body language and I sort of tune into the person and really what's going on with them that's not being said. And so if I can see the eye movement and the facial expressions, it really helps a lot.
I agree. I always prefer a camera for exactly that reason. Yeah, true. Thanks, Pam. All right, guys,
You
let's
don't
talk.
like it when I roll my eyes at you?
And one other thing I wanted to add, this is Carrie. Hi. One other thing I was going to ask about, and this may not be under Avoid Authenticate exactly, but I think pointing out our contribution is really important, because it does feel intangible. And I don't know if that's this, and this is feedback and reassurance more maybe, but I think sometimes because our contribution is less tangible, to point it out, like where you see the contribution, if that makes sense.
So you're saying you as an Avoid Authenticate, Carrie, would point it out?
No, we should.
Or I would like for it to be more like, I would like for it to be pointed out, because sometimes it does feel like it's intangible and it's not always as clear cut as maybe the use Authenticate that's more direct and tangible. So like pointing out where that sometimes intangible contribution is so valuable, I think is helpful for us. And I've realized that with other Avoid Authenticates that I work with as well, of like really pointing that out in front of a team, like, and you know, this has been really valuable, thank you for this, because sometimes we won't express it, or we won't, and sometimes we don't even know where the value is, because
Right.
it's kind of in the intangibles.
Correct. And sometimes it's not until that person is no longer in the team or is away that people go, oh, we really noticed that difference, but you don't always even assign it to the person until, you know, I don't know, it's too late. So it's a good call out. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on to the complete drive. So, you know, this is the drive here is all about connection, harmony, everything integrated, fitting together, going like clockwork. So when you think about for you as someone driven to complete, now you're working virtually and you want to be at your best when you're collaborating with others, one of your best contributions is particularly in the business world and at a leadership level where there's, you know, 70% plus of the people are Avoid Complete. One of your first challenges is that you're not, and I'll use these words carefully, but it's like you're not the same as the rest of the team. So for someone who likes to feel normal and a part of the group and I fit in, almost owning your uniqueness as something really unique that you bring to the team, and knowing that the way you see the world and whatever topics are being discussed is going to be different. So instead of shutting down and staying quiet, sharing that perspective as, guys, I'm sharing how I see this playing out. And the reason I use that expression carefully is that if you don't explain what it is, what your perspective is, where it's coming from around playing it out, people can see it as negative, because you see, well, you know, it can come across like, well, the problem with that is, or I'm not sure that's a good idea. But if you actually explain this, let me play that out for you. Here's what I see when this plays out. There's a lot of avoid completes that really, they know that about themselves. They know that they're more in the moment. And when you play it out and you explain that's where you're coming from, it's hugely valuable to the avoid complete world. And I find that helps it land so much more constructively. The second point is, you know, although we might have all agreed on certain rules, protocols, or decisions even as part of a plan, a business plan for the team, an avoid complete group are going to move away from those really quickly, like within hours. And so there's a role you can play to well, minutes, to keep us aligned, you know, and again, pointing it out is hugely valuable. Rather than getting frustrated by it, is pointing that out to us. This next one is playing to what Carrie was just saying before, but from a different angle. For, you know, the completers put a lot of effort into what they do, and yet effort is not always visible. Someone could have spent all weekend to produce what ultimately boils down to one slide. And people see one slide and can be very dismissive of it, not realizing you put all this work in. Plus, on top of that, out of sight is out of mind. So it's very easy to become, you know, very undervalued or to feel undervalued. And therefore you have to put extra work in having people be aware of the effort that you have gone to. And it's not to big note yourself, it's to actually just, you know, put the color on the chart, fill in the blanks that they can't see as they would had you been, you know, working in front of them all of the time. And one of the things that does happen in dialogues with the with working virtually is it's very easy to get cut off and feel overrun by the conversation. So use chat or putting your hand up or something to try and get the attention so that you can call that out and, you know, stay engaged with the team. I think it's good for us avoid complete people to be really aware of this distinction and help protect and preserve the energy and the talent of the completers in the team. We need them. Every successful team needs them, but, you know, we can very easily be disengaging them. And of course, if you're working with a completer or someone driven by this complete drive, it's pretty much, you can make the assumption that whatever time of day it is, they're always in the middle of doing something. So just acknowledging that if you ping them, you're interrupting them. Oh. And just calling that out, you know, just acknowledging that is just respectful, and it lands nicely for the for the completer. The more advanced notice you can give, the better. If you have a meeting that's scheduled for whatever time, 5 minutes, half an hour, 1 hour, just be aware that at the end of that, they've got the next thing scheduled to start right when that one finishes. And it may not be a meeting, it might be just a task they need to do, but they will have blocked that time because they don't like gaps in their day. So they will have filled the time in. So if you're going to go over, you know, you need to call that out and just be ready for the fact that they might need to make some adjustment or in fact move on. If there are changes, call them out, because otherwise they will stay with the plan and be working on something that's maybe no longer important to you. And that's not so obvious the more people are working virtually. So calling out what they need to change and at the end what you might even need them to stop doing that's no longer required, even though they might be halfway through it. Their instinct is they want to finish it just to say it's finished, and yet it may not be required anymore. You need to call that out. Anything that stands out to the completers here about you and what you need, or for those of you working with completers that you can see we should add to this list?
Paul, one thing I'd like to add is you've got proactively and regularly keep them informed. I'd like to go a step further in consulting them about when there might need to be a change in the plan, because they might see things differently and come up with a better change than I might come up with in the first place. So involve them in planning the changes.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thanks, JB.
Along that line, what I found with working with completes is to let them know what's not changing. so they don't have to factor everything in and redo a new plan for things. Start with, this is working, that's going to stay, and we're only doing, so you give them a nice base that's not changing, and then add on the new thing, rather than have them scope the whole thing all over again.
That's really good, Greg. Thank you.
I wonder, maybe, Paul, just building on one of the things you said there about the not liking gaps, I'd probably, a bit like Julianne, build on that and say there aren't gaps. And I suppose in sort of saying that, it comes probably to the first point. You're always interrupting. So that's, you know, it's on both sides of the fence, is being aware that, you know, that you are being interrupted. So you need to have a plan to allow for that, because it is going to happen.
Yep. How do you do that, Richard? As a completer yourself, how do you best do that?
I suppose it's having a day sort of generally mapped out. So you can even probably predict when some of the unpredictable stuff sort of might happen, you know, from, you know, the sort of things that are on your plate. So it's probably having a plan for the stuff that's going to be unplanned, and then knowing when that thing comes in. I suppose the tough bit is when it's far more than what you'd allowed for in a day, and that can sort of turn you into a really long day and you're working well into the evening or something. But hopefully, if that's more rarely, it's okay.
How do you cope with that? When that happens, how do you deal with that?
I think in the first instance, you just put it down. It's just a loss, but then it's probably, and you know, you've lost some time that you were going to be doing something maybe recreational or something, but it's something that's not sustainable. So I think having it pointed out or being aware of it ourselves in this working virtual time, because you could end up just working 24/7 really. Yep. Is going to be a real important one. So it's probably having others check with you on that sort of thing will be useful.
You just raised another great point around the boundaries. You know, when we are working virtually, it's so easy to just think people are always accessible, but if there are boundaries, respecting those boundaries is really, really crucial. Okay, let's move to the avoid complete. So if you're avoid complete, and this is the drive that jumps around a lot, you know, changes tack, needs the variety, that's all well and good. But when you're working virtually, all the people working with you don't necessarily see that you're jumping around like that. And so there is a need to really over communicate here. Firstly, keeping them informed of the changes that are occurring, but also just, you know, giving a lot more detail. There's a lot of avoid completes. I'm a very empowering person. This happens a lot with leaders. You know, when you talk to the leader will say, I'm really empowering, because I don't like to do the work. I like to empower other people to do it. So then you go to their people and you go, do you feel empowered? And they go, no, we don't feel empowered, because we don't get enough of the context, enough of the detail. We don't get the chance to ask the questions to really feel set up to be able to then go and execute. And that's why there's such an issue with misalignment in so many organizations, because the people who are doing the delegating are the avoid completes, and they've delegated, you know, 10% of the information that the people who are doing the work, even if they're avoid complete themselves, need to get. So I would say, as a rule of thumb, you need to allow a lot more time for Q&A than what feels comfortable or natural. And only once you feel that you're getting bored, like really bored, and you've got to really fight your own instincts, sustain it, now you're sort of probably about where you need to be. You know, if you're delegating and getting out of things at your pace, meaning you're moving to the next thing before it's become boring for you, you're probably moving too quickly. And if you think about the needs of the people beneath you, so you don't have to keep coming back to it, but you can fully empower them, you need to spend more time on that in instruction and context, so they're loaded up to execute. And if there are promises you've made or things you've said you're going to do, like I will get back to you, or leave that with me and I'll do this, using the tools around you, whether it's Outlook or alarms on your phone and so on, to remind you to follow up and finish or do things that you promised, because you will get distracted and move on to the next thing. And one of the things when you're not working virtually, when you're in the office and you see people, it's so easy to sort of go, oh my God, there's Sharon, I forgot about that, I'll do that now. So the person themselves can be a prompt. But when you don't have those people around you all the time, you need to put your own reminders in place and use the tools that we have available with technology to be able to do that. Then if you're working with people that are avoid complete, clearly be brief. You know, so when you are communicating using technology, can you put your message in the subject line of an email rather than have a big long email? And certainly if it's got a scroll bar, you have already lost them. So get rid of, you know, that it's got to fit on the subject line or virtually the first sentence of an email. And if it's longer than that, you might even send them something shorter, like send a text message, say, hey, I've just sent you an email, it's about X. So they've got something that's brief that just, you know, basically alerts them to what it's about. But keep things short and sweet. Ask for short meetings, you know, so that the talent of the avoid complete is they'll pivot on a dime. So if you have a 5-minute meeting, but it really grabs them, they will figure out how else they might spontaneously change things around to make it a bit longer if they need it to be. But if you ask for a 30-minute meeting or a 1-hour meeting, that's just too long. But if you ask for short meetings, you're more likely to get them, and then they'll just provide for more time. And I think to work that way virtually, when you're, you know, just trying to grab people somewhat spontaneously, that's how you get the attention of the avoid complete. And be ready for them to act now. You know, there's times people say, well, I know I'm catching you off by surprise, so can we set up a time to meet? And the avoid complete is thinking like, I'm ready, I'm good to go. Like, let's talk right now. I've just made changes mentally to deal with this. But you may not be ready, and you're the one asking for the meeting. So I'd say be ready to go. And when you're working with an avoid complete person, and then check in often to stay aligned to them, because sure as hell things will have moved. Okay, anything else that you see, whether you're a complete or avoid complete, are there things that stand out to you we need to be relevant for you?
So this is Ilona, and I'm a 2. And one of the things that I really appreciate that Sarah does when we meet together is she goes, okay, so we're doing this. And it's almost like the reminder of the goal right at the beginning, right? And it never feels like a nag or a recap. It's just like, okay, here's this. And it's like that little trigger that gets me present. And I always really appreciate that.
That is such an important call out. I know when people come to me with the meeting and they go, okay, so what we're doing, you know, not what we're doing in terms of the goal, but they just continue on where we left off being a day ago or, you know, sometime before, assuming that I'm going to remember where we were. I've got like a blank mind on why we're even meeting, even if I've got a topic. So that's a great call out, Ilona, to just sort of bridge the gap between where did you leave off last time and what's that got to do with where we are now. It's so valuable to an avoid complete person.
And I think it also goes to the benefit of the doubt, because I know when we first started working together, I'd go, okay, now what are we talking about? And right. And even though I had just read the agenda or just prepared, but I distracted myself with something. And so giving someone who's driven to avoid complete the benefit of the doubt that it's not that they didn't prepare, it's just that they need that little poke.
Right. Great call.
There's one little trick, another one little trick, Paul, is give us lots of beginnings and ends. So saying, okay, next we're going to do, okay, that's that. So wrap things, don't just move to the next thing, but have a little tiny little wrap that says, we're done now. Okay, now we're doing this, now we're doing that. So we have five things done rather than one long meeting.
That's really good, Greg. Really good. What a nuance that is. That's excellent.
Yeah, Paul, the other one about tools was interesting because I've actually, you know, as an avoid complete and catch myself doing it all the time, I've actually set my calendar down to 15-minute slots. So I'm basically chopping and changing different tasks and different meetings and all the rest of it, you know, at most every 15 minutes at the moment, just to keep on top of everything, but not actually, you know, spending hours on one particular task. So just scheduling my day that way, it works a lot better than trying to put massive chunks of time into doing one thing.
Can you change your calendar to be 15-minute blocks, can you?
Yeah, Outlook's got a setting to set it down to 15 minutes.
Cool. Thank you. I'll look for the 5-minute version.
We're all going to look forward to seeing that.
All right, guys, I'm aware of time. Let's move on to the improvised drive. So, you know, if you are an improviser, strong improvised drive here, someone suggested this to me the other day, keeping a positivity list to capture the various wins. So when you are in meetings and people say to you, oh, what's been going on? And, you know, you are not necessarily going to just automatically remember everything, but if you've got a list there to share, it keeps your energy up, but it lets you also then inspire and positively influence the people that you are meeting with or connecting with. And then when it comes to being you know, in a meeting, to keep your energy up, it's often the improvisers that will do a lot of the interaction. And so rather than dominating the meeting and being overly interactive, think about the questions you could ask to get others to share. Or, you know, I'm trying to say, like, instead of you being the person that shares that, it's like you invoke the interaction, you help stimulate the interaction so that it's others that are doing a lot of the talking, but you were the catalyst then in that sense. I think that's, those were the key things that really stood out for working virtually for the improvisers. And then if you are working with people that are like that, you know, positive energy. So smile, and this is again the benefit of having your video on, but smile, have some fun, be upbeat, have a laugh about something, look at the lighthearted side of it, even think of things you can share like that to keep it positive and upbeat. That's really important to the energy and the engagement of an improviser. Get them talking quickly, get them interacting, because that will get their energy up and get their engagement happening. And the more interaction there is, not only is it positive energy, but the interaction tends to build an urgency, and they work best with urgency. So I would say to you, not only in the meeting, but if you finish this meeting, like move to the next meeting quickly, because the quicker you start moving, the energy and the urgency starts to really build, and you get more stuff done with improvisers that way. What else do you see, guys?
All right, that was a gap. I'm jumping in. One of the things I'd look to do to not be on my own head is look for the gold that's out there that no one's saying. Like look for the down yellow and up pinks that aren't saying something necessarily, and find a way to mine them, because there's often some great thinking and some great ideas, but they're holding back for a range of great reasons. So go and mine the gold that's in the other people that in the room, and it's like a treasure hunt.
That's good. That's good, Greg. Thank you.
And I think for someone that's been treasure hunted, a bit of warning that sort of is going to happen in a meeting might be good. And then
a warning that you're going to find gold.
We find the most. And then in the end, we all find the most treasure.
All right, Richard, I hear you.
You would have been good on the pirate ship, Richard. Man overboard.
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at avoid improvised drive. So if you are an avoid improviser, the thing here is, you know, you can talk about what you've been doing, but to keep people engaged, and this is the classic issue of not self-promoting, but what's of what you've been doing, just to connect it back to what the strategic priorities, the mission of the business, of the team, show that connection. It's not obvious to everybody else, even though what you've been doing is incredibly valuable. People won't necessarily join those dots and see the connection to the strategic value. But if you do that, it considerably amplifies the value of your work. So it's something that you don't, I'm not sure why people don't do it, whether they feel like it is big noting themselves or they just assume that that's obvious, but I can assure you it's not. And it's not to both drives. It's not to the avoid improvise, but it's also not to the improviser. But if you join that connection, it will do a lot for honoring the value of what you've really done. If you need time to think things through, just tell people that. Often people are totally okay with it, but they don't realize that that's what your need is. And so rather than staying silent or have nothing to say today, just say, if you just give me overnight, I'll think about this and I'll come back to you tomorrow, or just give me an hour and can we reconvene? I just need some time to think this through. But honor your own drives that way. People get it, but they need to be reminded of it to really honor it, or help you honor it. And if you are stuck for a contribution yourself and you're thinking, well, I don't want to be silent, I want to think about things I can say, go to your drives, go to what you bring as strengths. Like, what are the risks? What are the concerns? Where is their substance? What do you fear? Go to those things and then think about sharing those, not in a negative sense, but more from that place of, guys, help me with this. Here's what I'm seeing. You guys maybe aren't, so you see a way around this. Like, help me see that. And then it doesn't land negatively. It lands like you're sharing really valuable perspective. And if you are working with people who are like that, you know, make sure that you've got the facts, the substance, and the value, that it's obvious. Because if you've basically, the more you've got to talk to something to make it seem valuable, the more the message actually gets diluted and disengages the avoid improvised people. They like the quality and the value to speak for itself, not you have to sort of fill in all of those gaps. Use your chat and text to reassure them that they're safe to speak up publicly. So behind the scenes, you might be just pinging someone and saying, hey, why don't you raise the example of what we talked about yesterday? I've got your back. Like, I'll fill it in if it needs any support, and just make it safer for people to contribute. And you can use the collaboration technology that way to create a safer environment for people to then have less risk and therefore share more publicly. And then give them time to respond. It could be as simple as saying, you know, and Richard, I'm not going to do this to you, but, you know, in a couple of minutes when I finish this point, I'm going to have Richard share his example of what happened last. And you put people on notice that way, so they've got a little bit of time to share. And obviously, if I can do that even before the meeting, the more notice you can give so that they don't feel put on the spot and under pressure to just think of something off the cuff, the more that's going to be, you know, in line with who they are, and allow them to respond and operate more in stride. Any comments or observations here for the avoid improvisers?
I think, Paul, building on the one about thinking about risks and concerns, something that probably I've learnt, and would just to be able to use the word challenge to someone, you know, I see this as a challenge, and probably with a bit more of an animated inflection in how you say it to the improviser is pretty valuable, because they seem to, wow, it's a challenge, whereas it's negative and downbeat if it's a risk.
Right. Okay. Okay, that's good. Thanks, Richard.
And if I can maybe just share one thing, I find my expression is run with the horse before trying to turn it. So just stay with them. When the improviser's in full creative mode, don't try and point out what may or may not work. Run with them, and then as they get it out, then you can gradually turn them. Putting out my trade secrets here.
That's a great metaphor. You do that well, Ian.
Thanks, Paul. Know the secret now.
Don't worry, I'll forget. All right, guys, we're at the top of the hour. I hope you found this valuable, and as we all keep working virtually, that there's some tips and tricks in here that just help you be more conscious of, firstly, how you show up and how to be more in your game and get your own needs met. But then, particularly when you know the IDs of other people, factor some of these strategies and insights into how you work more effectively with them. This will get posted onto our website in the next day or so. And then we have another webinar coming up next week, which is about leading teams in a virtual environment. And if you can make that time, I think that's now posted on our site as well. We look forward to seeing you on that webinar next week. Again, working virtually, but how you lead teams in a virtual environment. Thanks for being here today. Have a wonderful day or evening, and we look forward to seeing you next time. All the best, guys.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. Good one.